The chair recognizes Alder Vasquez.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I appreciate that we're having the conversation here. I'd like to start in conversation on things we agree on. We all agree that we want our constituents and all of us want to be able to get home safe when we get home from work. We want our kids to be able to get to school safely. These are priorities. When we talk public safety, that's number one for all of us. I say that because I don't accept some of the framing as the conversation's already started here. This is not about being anti-police when you want to see accountability. This is about being anti-people who shouldn't be police in the first place. It is about a small margin of officers who would currently be officers that are up for either a year-long suspension or outright dismissal. I would argue that is not the majority of police officers. Every single one of us works with our commanders. We talk to our officers on the ground. We know they do some of the hardest work in city government. They walk into situations none of us would want to walk into. The reason why I say that is when we're talking about arbitration, we're not talking about them at all, actually. When we're talking about arbitration, we are talking about people who should not be officers in the first place. And I wish that officers fought as hard to get rid of bad officers as they fight this hard for this arbitration piece. We would be in much more agreement if we heard that. I'm about to be 45 years old. I've been born and raised and grown up in this city. I have never heard an officer call out another officer for things they shouldn't be doing in my whole time as a Chicagoan. I've never heard that officer shouldn't be an officer, that officer should be fired. I heard a whole lot of defense for people who shouldn't be officers, but I've never heard someone say, you know what? That person right there embarrasses our whole police force. They make it more dangerous for all the good officers, and that person should not be on the force. I've never heard that publicly anywhere at all. And so that is why I don't accept the premise. When people want to talk about, hey, this is about oaths. Sure. It's also about oath keepers and Proud Boys and people who also are defended all the time. And no one calls them out for not having, they shouldn't be officers. In fact, the only time we found out about officers who were oath keepers was because they admitted to it in arbitration, in closed doors, and then didn't suffer any consequences for admitting it. That is why we found that out. Because it happened behind closed doors, not on the police board, not publicly. And that officer was not held to account. I know that because it happened in 40th Ward. It didn't occur. There was no accountability there. When we have people talking about, well, you're going to spend a whole lot of money on these cases. You're going to spend a whole lot of money in lawsuits. Everyone's a conservative fiscal hawk when it comes to spending on that. I don't hear the same energy when we spend over $100 million every year on police misconduct settlements. I don't hear that energy about how much dollars we keep spending there and how we need to have accountability, right? So we're not continuing to spend the tax dollars that our taxpayers pay. They don't bring that up. And that's a whole lot more money than we're talking about this case here, right? So spare me this fiscal hawk conversation if you're not willing to have it when we're spending a whole lot more money for misconduct. And again, this is a small margin of officers who shouldn't be officers, not the majority, who we all support you do the work to keep people safe because safety is number one. So the fact that you're going that hard for a small margin that shouldn't be officers is actually more problematic, because if we had a conversation about supporting the good ones and about public arbitration or an actual police board that isn't being gutted right now as we speak, we might have a lot more to agree on that would lead to a safer city, but we're not here having that conversation, right? When we want to talk about accountability, safety, transparency is a part of that conversation. You don't get that when you only have these conversations behind closed doors. Lastly, I'll say this, because people want to make it a labor conversation. That's absolutely fair. I agree, labor unions have the right to arbitration. But I'll tell you this, a plumber's never broken on a door to get into somebody's house. A pipe fitter's never arrested anybody. An electrical worker never shot somebody. No one's ever died because of a carpenter, right? So when we talk about the difference in the role, there should be an understanding at the state level that there's different understandings. It's absolutely right. Officers don't have the right to strike. And that is, in that regard of the conversation, an unfortunate reality, because these are nuanced conversations. But when we talk about the other side of it, they, by virtue of their role, are able to do things other unions can't. They should be held to a different standard with more accountability because of it. So when we're voting for no to arbitration here, it's not because people hate the police. It's not because people want anything to be less safe. It's because it requires nuance to get it right, to have accountability and to be transparent. Because if you have a transparent process, then when officers, when they make the right calls in situations that aren't so clear cut, can also make that case publicly so we can understand why they made that call. Doing it all behind closed doors to absolve somebody of any level of accountability is not the right way to do it. It's not public. It's not fiduciary responsible. So that's why I'm voting no on the arbitration. Thank you, President.